Those of you over on this side of the room who can't see the screen, my advice is to probably move into a position at some point where you can see the pictures, because they're far more interesting than any words I have to share. It was suggested a little earlier tonight that people are disappointed that I'm not here to discuss housing affordability and real estate. But I want you to know, Arnold Silver, I am here to discuss real estate. Howard Jampolsky pointed out that he sells real estate by 12 square feet at a time, and I just calculated, it works out about $2,000 a square foot, but that you can buy into the Bellevue in Navalside, West Vancouver. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to get right into this, and hopefully you can see the screens. If not, I'll share some of the words. It's true that although I haven't met many of you, especially those of you who come from the United States, I can read your minds because my distant cousin Yuri and other members of our family have this special power. So let's see how close I am to what some of you are thinking. I hope he's going to do more than just show us pictures of cemeteries. I am. Harriet Wolf knows I often go on much too long, and this is what Shirley Barnett is thinking. I hope he talks about personal and community memories. And that's in fact what I'd like to share with you tonight. Memories that many of us have personally, and memories that our communities have. And if I may indulge you with a little personal story, my name is Geller. Whenever I met someone named Geller, I said, "Where's your family from?" Invariably, they were from Odessa. And one day in 1994, I said to my father, "You know, we should go to Odessa, see our family roots." And my friend Herb Auerbach said, "Why are you going to Odessa?" I said, "We're going to see how many Gellers there are in the Odessa telephone directory." And as it so happens, we had a wonderful time together. Odessa, as some of you may know, is Vancouver's sister city. Philip Owen wrote a lovely note. We had such a great day, we completely forgot to check the phone book. But more recently, I've been working in Russia, and I went back to Odessa, and sure enough, here's the young lady checking the phone book to see how many Gellers there are, and indeed, there are still quite a few. The interesting thing is, after checking out at the Jewish Museum, I found a kosher restaurant in Odessa. And it was interesting because, again, when you think about memories, for many of us, our memories are special places, places where we had meals, Sunday brunch with our fathers or mothers, and so forth. So I went into the Odessa delicatessen, and they put this little wooden stick with these bagels. I guess these are the original bagels, which are quite different than the ones you get in Montreal or elsewhere. But where do we go? Well, we go to museums. Some of you may not recognize this museum. I know it looks a bit like Libeskind Museum in Berlin that we'll look at shortly. But this is actually a Libeskind Museum in Copenhagen, a Jewish museum in Copenhagen. We go to synagogues for memories. And indeed, some of you may recognize this. If you don't, I'll tell you what it is in a few minutes. And we also go, of course, to cemeteries. And not all cemeteries look alike. Linda Reed and I were talking about the fact that there aren't cemeteries in Richmond because of the water table. But how many of you know this cemetery, or cemeteries like this one, where all the caskets are above ground? This one happens to be in North Africa. We go to memorials, Holocaust memorials. They're all over the world. This one was in Bratislava, and I'll show you some others there as well. And sometimes we go to delicatessens. And everyone who's been to Montreal has been to Walensky's, and it's full of memories. Memories of Dodi Kravitz, of Mordecai Richler, and the history of the Jewish community of Montreal. So this evening I'd like to take you on a trip around the world and visit some of these places, and hopefully they will have memories for you. I know many of you have been to these same places, but probably there's some places that you haven't been to. Yes, that's my friend Richard Henricus, a very prominent architect in Vancouver, who always incorporates memory into his work. One of his more famous buildings in Vancouver is an apartment building on the waterfront of English Bay, where he wanted to create the memory of the forest that used to be on that site by planting a tree on the roof that was at the same height as the original forest. And it became almost a landmark for this iconic building until the city of Vancouver imposed water restrictions. One more reason, Arnold, to get a change of government. And as a result of those water restrictions, that tree died, and it's costing the condominium $534,000 to replace that tree. One of the surprises my wife and I had is we were touring the cemetery in Wellington, New Zealand, and were surprised to come across a small section of the Jewish cemetery. And indeed, I guess in many of the cities that you represent, a Jewish cemetery is often part of the broader city cemetery. How many of you have been to Australia? And one of the things you discover there is a vibrant Jewish community in many of these cities, in Melbourne, in Sydney, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, and some beautiful museums. One in Melbourne that I found very interesting because it told the story of the Jewish arrival in Australia. And of course, like all the other first residents of Australia, the first Jews to arrive were convicts. 8 English convicts who arrived in Australia, and over the next 60 years, many other people, as they mentioned in the marketing materials I saw, of Jewish descent were sent to Australia. And when I read that, all I could think of was, isn't that an interesting way to increase the number of nice Jewish boys? Some of you may have had an opportunity to go to Hong Kong. And if you did, you went to the Jewish cemetery. Now, one of the interesting things about the Jewish cemetery in Hong Kong is where it's located, and I'm not making this up. It's located in Happy Valley. If you go to the Jewish cemetery in Hong Kong, afterwards you may want to go to the Shalom Jewish Deli. And if you look at the menu of this Jewish deli, it doesn't look like a New York deli. But when you go inside the deli, it looks just like a New York deli. One of the more interesting Jewish communities that my wife and I came across was on the island of Rhodes. And indeed, as some of you know, it has one of the oldest synagogues in the world, which has been recognized by American Express, who, along with many others, have contributed money to help restore the facility. And when we arrived in Shabbos, we unfortunately couldn't get in. It was all locked up, and it turned out there was an American delegation. And as they were coming out, we saw this as an opportunity to go in. They have trouble getting a rabbi there. Most congregations have trouble getting rabbis. But inside, it was quite a magnificent building, and you really did feel the history, and of course, looking at the Sefer Torah, you really did have an appreciation of just how old it was. And there on the walls was a plaque, and you can't read these names, but these are the people who died during the Second World War, and you read the names, and these are the names of families that have now spread out around the world. So now I have a question for you. I want you to look carefully at this picture and tell me, where is it? If you thought it was Istanbul, you're absolutely right. And Istanbul, of course, is a very multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic city. And when my wife and I were there with our daughter, We toured around. Now, we didn't do the Jewish heritage tours that are now organized, which you can do, but we did our own tour. And of course, one of the places you go to in Istanbul is the Blue Mosque. And I have to tell you, we were there with our daughter. She was 27 at the time, 23 at the time, and all she did was complain. All we're doing, she says, is going to churches and tourist things. We're not really experiencing this city. I said, we're not experiencing this city because we don't know any Turkish people. The only Turkish people we know are Çela and the Philosophes, our neighbors on Deering Island. Guess who was in the Blue Mosque? The Philosophes. And so for the next 3 days, they showed us Istanbul. They took us to their friend's glorious house, and my daughter was as happy as could be. And if any of you have a young son or grandson who wants a 35-year-old girl with her own car and her own condo, it's Claire Keller at hotmail.com. I showed this at Colel one year, and the next day my daughter phoned me. Dad, she said, what have you done? All these guys are emailing me. One of the most interesting countries when it comes to the Jews and the memories of the Jews is Bulgaria. And I must admit, I didn't know this when I was there, but in fact, Bulgaria protected the Jewish community and did not send them off, did not report them. And Sofia is kind of an interesting city. I mean, it's a hodgepodge. This was taken a few years ago, but it does have some magnificent churches that are listed as sites to see, buildings like this. But when we were looking at the places to see in Sofia, we discovered that one of the must-sees high on the list is the synagogue. And this is the Sofia Synagogue, and it's just a beautiful building. And as it says, it's the largest Sephardic synagogue in Europe, seating about 1,170. And suffice it to say, it's not that full on Shabbos at the moment. And indeed, when you look at it from the outside, like many of the synagogues throughout Europe, thank you, is, it doesn't look like a synagogue, at least not the way we think a synagogue should look. But inside, it's quite magnificent. And the ceilings, as you can see, are beautifully detailed. And there was a small women's auxiliary, and they had these handmade teapots. And I thought, what a wonderful way to remember this trip. So we bought a kippah, and I'm proud to say, but I think this is part of memory too, isn't it? Going to places, buying things, souvenirs, and so forth. One of the cities that I didn't know a lot about its Jewish history was Dubrovnik in Croatia. And there's, of course, many other communities in Croatia. And if you go there, there are, in fact, organized tours that you can take of the Jewish community and the synagogue, and Chabad is very active. And I was surprised to learn Dubrovnik has the second oldest synagogue in all of Europe. And if you don't know where the oldest synagogue is, I'll show you shortly. But I mean, this goes back centuries. And indeed, it's quite impressive when you go inside. And it really felt a sense of history. And of course, you can't help but think about all the Jews who lived in Croatia and this part of the world, who of course are no longer with us. But members of their family are, indeed. There may be some of you. Does anybody here have family from Slovakia? Bratislava once had a significant Jewish population. And when we went into the tourist bureau, sure enough, we saw a guide to Bratislava in Hebrew. But obviously the person who was arranging the books didn't know how to read Hebrew, because if you can't see, it was upside down. But my contribution to the Jewish community of Bratislava was to at least put the guidebook up the right way. One of the things we found was a Jewish museum in Bratislava, and one of the artifacts in the museum was quite fascinating. I don't know how old that would be, but goes back a few years. And after touring the museum, we went outside and discovered the Shea David Hotel. And we thought, it's Sunday, we should go for brunch. And we went inside the Shea David Hotel, and if you can see those pictures on the wall, they're rabbis from over the years. And we don't speak the language, but she knew, the server knew that we wanted menus, and she brought us menus, but she also brought us something no one has ever brought me before in a restaurant: a sheet laminated of Jewish jokes. And I'm only going to share one of them with you because we're in Bratislava. And it's about Rabinovich, who goes into the cafe and he orders a cup of tea and a copy of Pravda. And the server says, I can bring you the tea, but since the overthrow of the government, I can't bring you Pravda. It's no longer being published. The next day he goes into the restaurant and he orders a cup of tea and a copy of Pravda. And the server says, you were here yesterday, as I told you. I can bring you the tea, but since the overthrow of the government, Pravda is no longer being published. The third day he goes back, he says, I'd like a cup of tea and a copy of Pravda. Look, she says, you strike me as an intelligent person. I told you, since the overthrow of the government, they no longer publish Pravda. He says, I know, but I love hearing you say it. Budapest, who's had family from Hungary? Yes. So my name is Geller, and often people would say, are you from Hungary? And the reason they ask that is because a famous hotel and a famous mount in Budapest is Gellert. And when my wife and I checked in and they saw our name, they said, I guess with a name like yours, we're going to have to upgrade you a little bit. And they did. And they gave, Sally will tell you, a lovely suite overlooking the Danube, and we thought we died and gone to heaven, given the rate we were being charged. And the next morning, as we were leaving our room, the manager behind the counter called us over. And I thought, uh-oh, he's going to tell us that they made a mistake and they're going to put us in another room. But no, he handed me a piece of paper, and this is what it said. The company newsletter was called The Geller. The synagogue, of course, is the largest in Europe, and it's absolutely magnificent. And you go inside, and it's spectacular, and you can't help but think about the vibrant Jewish community that lived there up until the war, the Arab Kodesh. And then you go into the backyard, and there's one of the most beautiful memorials anybody has ever seen. And these weeping willows, every leaf on the willow is the name of the family that was killed in the war and the Holocaust. And inside there's a Jewish museum, and again, it's so sad because, of course, these are the artifacts from the families who were forced away, and now they're part of a museum. And there's a map of the Jewish ghetto. And then there's the gift store, and it's a happier collection of things that you can get. And again, many people will be buying here. I bought a t-shirt of some dancing Hasidic rabbis that I was going to wear tonight, but either it shrunk or I've grown. Many of us have family from Prague, Czechoslovakia. And indeed, if you wondered where the oldest synagogue in Europe is, of course, it is in Prague. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's right. And it is quite a magnificent, and of course the cemetery there, as I think most of you know, is equally remarkable because over the years, the layers have just been added and added. And it's a conversation I'm sure you'll be having From Prague, my wife and I went to Krakow. I wasn't planning to go to Poland. I always felt a bit uncomfortable about Poland, but I worked with an architect here. He said you should go. And Krakow is a fascinating place because, of course, at one time there was a significant Jewish population, but they're gone. There are no Jews to speak of left in Krakow, but you wouldn't know it if you go there because the traces of Jewish culture are all over the city. Purely by chance, our hotel was outside of this square, which has these chairs, which is a Holocaust memorial, because this is the square where Jews were gathered and seated before they were sent off to the camps. And I must admit, I was somewhat uncomfortable with all of this, but indeed, Krakow's economy is now in large part dependent upon Jews who come from around the world to visit the camps and to really take a trip back. There's Jewish bookstores in Krakow. The Nissenbaum Foundation, which some of you may know, has spent a lot of money trying to help people remember the Jewish community of Poland. There's a small synagogue there. There's also a Jewish museum, and if you go inside, I mean, it's very modern, it's very contemporary, it's beautifully lit and so forth. But I could not get over all of these Jewish-style hotels and restaurants. We wondered why we hadn't stayed at this one, the Klezmer. Indeed, we should have stayed at the Hotel Esther, my sister's Esther, and another Jewish restaurant. And even the cars going around town, I don't know if they're delivering or Jewish. How often do you see Hebrew on the outside of a car driving around the city? Well, you do in Krakow. Anyway, Sally and I found a restaurant for dinner because not only could we have dinner, but there was a klezmer band playing. And I'm sorry you can't read this menu, but it is full of Jewish-style delicacies. All the European dishes that I'm sure my forefathers ate. We didn't even eat many of these things in our house. And then the next thing was a book full of desserts. And I couldn't decide between the apple cake or the nut cake or the Oreo cake. And the server said, perhaps you would like today's dessert special. And to the day I die, I will never forget the dessert special at this restaurant in Krakow. It was chorosis and ice cream. So when Shirley told me the head of your organization's name is Brodsky, I thought, I'm sure somewhere along the line I've been to a synagogue called Brodsky, and I found this picture. And not only is it the Brodsky Choral Synagogue in Kiev, Brodsky's car was parked in front. And how do I know that this is a car belonging to a member of the Brodsky Synagogue? Who else would want a double high license plate? There's still lots of money left in the Ukraine. One of the things that my wife and I decided to do, and she agreed to allow me to do this, instead of flying from Poland to Russia, we would take the train. And the reason I wanted to take the train was because it would go through Minsk, and I wanted to get off on the platform and tell my favorite joke that many of you know about the Minsk cow to anyone who would listen. And I'm not going to tell it to you tonight. My wife can relax. But afterwards, if you want to hear it, many of you have family, no doubt, from Russia. And indeed, it's a remarkable place. Red Square at midnight. I took this picture, and it really was quite something. But more recently, when I've been going back to Russia, I got a job as a juror for the new International Financial Center in Moscow. And it was a fascinating competition on 1,000 acres of land. It used to be outside the boundary of the city of Moscow, but the chairman of the bank that owned the property was a good friend of Mr. Putin, and now it's just inside the boundaries of the city of Moscow. But one cold January day, and this picture I didn't take, I couldn't find my pictures, I heard that there was a Jewish museum in Moscow, and they call it the Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center. It's kind of interesting. And inside, the displays are quite magnificent. It really is. It was an old barn, or bus barn type structure that's been converted. But the statues and the sculpture, as you walk around, you can see your grandparents and your great-grandparents as they probably were living life in the shtetl. From Moscow, my wife and I took the train to a boat up to St. Petersburg. And those of you been there know it is a truly magnificent city. But the other thing is it has a magnificent synagogue. And it's the Grand Choral. And it is the second largest. And I love kippahs. And so inside there was a little gift area. And I thought, maybe I could get one of those colorful Russian kippahs that all the guys at Or Shalom, the synagogue I go to, wear. But I couldn't find one. In fact, surely the only kippah I could find was this one in a little box with what looked like coffee beans. And you can't see it, but it's 9,750 rubles, which in today's conversion is 235 Canadian dollars. So I didn't buy it. St. Petersburg was designed, as many of you know, by Dutch architects. So it's only appropriate that I take you now to Amsterdam, a wonderful city with a beautiful Jewish museum, and some of you may know there's a museum. There's also that synagogue that from the outside you can't even see it. It's buried inside. But in the Jewish museum I saw this painting, and I thought, that's magnificent. Looks like a Rembrandt painting. Someone said, yes, it is a Rembrandt painting this Jewish scene. And the museum is really beautifully done, and the Dutch, of course, feel an affinity for the Jewish people, and I spend a lot of time with Dutch people, and we've spent a bit of time in Holland lately, and always feel very comfortable there as a Jew. And of course, one of the landmarks of the Jewish community in Amsterdam is the Anne Frank House. But unfortunately, it is always a huge lineup outside. And I said to my wife, I'm sorry, I just don't want to line up. It's hours. Anyway, our next stop was going to be Sao Paulo, Brazil, where we were going to hook up with a Jewish fellow we had met through Shalom Vancouver many years ago. And the first thing he took us to was an Anne Frank exhibition in a bookstore owned by a Jew in Sao Paulo. And it's quite an impressive one. And if you've been following the news lately and seeing what's going on in Brazil, it's really quite sad and unfortunate, because Brazil is not some third world country. Brazil is a very sophisticated, civilized country. And the Jewish community has a presence. And for those of you who have not been to the Sao Paulo Jewish community, I'd like to take you there. Because the community center, it was harder to get in to the community center than it was to get into Brazil for reasons of security. And of course, we know what's happened in Argentina and Brazil. But let me show you around. This is one of 4 swimming pools. There's a beautiful bookstore, a Jewish bookstore. The center has its own synagogue. And it even has its own, are you ready? Sushi restaurant. So what do you order in the sushi restaurant in the Jewish Community Center in Sao Paulo? Of course, the Hebraic platter. And as we're walking around, I see a McDonald's. What? I said, Andre, you have a McDonald's here? Yes, he said, but they only sell ice cream and dessert. Anyway, let's go back to Europe as we start to end this. Sally and I were wandering around for a small French city, and it wasn't Paris. And we came across a sign that pointed us to the synagogue. And I was going to look at the name. Does anybody know which city this is in? It starts with a C, and I've forgotten. But anyway.
Where the melons.
Yeah.
Where the melons are from. C-A-B-A.
Something like that. Anyway, it's a very interesting, beautiful. The trouble is, they don't have any money. The Jewish community's gone. They don't have any money to restore. One of the things they were hoping to do was to get some drawings of it. And I said, you should get architectural students from Yale or somewhere. I'm sure they would happily come over and do measured drawings. But what a beautiful synagogue with no services at the moment. But now I'm going to take you to a place where there are still a lot of Jews. Indeed, this is where my family came from Odessa. They moved to England. And, of course, some of you, I'm sure, have family from England. And the Jewish Museum in London is quite impressive. And one of the things that I was fascinated by was throughout the museum, there's a chronological map of the history of the Jews going back to the 12th century. Now, of course, not necessarily the 12th century in England, but the 12th century throughout the world. And some amazing displays that really tell the story of the Jewish people within the culture of their day in terms of hospitals and charitable and running orphanages and so forth, including a Jewish boxer. And, of course, Jewish boxers often wore a Magen David on their pants. The Bakers' Union, even then arguing for an 8-hour day and no night work. And I was thinking, how could you not have night work? How do you get fresh bagels early in the morning? But the museum is a very touching display, and it tells the whole history of the Jews in London. And those of you who have family in London, you know how they moved from the east side, and then they moved up north to Golders Green and Hendon and so forth. And it really is quite beautiful. And indeed, the displays are there, both for Jews to go and understand, but like so many Jewish museums, for people who aren't Jewish, who just simply want to learn a little bit more about the Jewish people. And that's how I'm going to start ending off. One of the sad things at the Jewish Museum in London was a temporary exhibition on the life of Amy Winehouse, who, of course, we lost not so long ago. Well, of course, for many, the Jewish Museum in Berlin is perhaps the most famous Jewish museum. And I have to admit, the displays are really quite remarkable. You can't read that, but in German and in English it says a rabbi is asked, why do Jews always answer a question with another question? Why not? Or David Ben-Gurion's line, who is a Jew? And I consider as Jewish anyone with sugar enough to call themselves Jewish. But a lot of these displays are quite edgy. This was a display where you used to put in little tokens as a visitor as to which of these qualities you think are representative of the Jewish people. Like, are Jewish people intelligent? Are they sporty? Are they good at business? Are they influential? What was interesting was the one that had the most tokens was beautiful. But I thought it was a very interesting thing. Another display, which is something that we all often think about, is who's Jewish and who isn't Jewish. Was Elvis Presley Jewish? He always wore a large Magen David. Why did he wear a Magen David? Because his hairdresser was Jewish. Was Charlie Chaplin Jewish? To tell you the truth, I always thought Charlie Chaplin was Jewish. But of course, he's not Jewish. But this was kind of an interesting display. Of course, one of the most interesting parts is Liebeskin's edition. And how many of you have been to this? Yeah. I mean, it's quite something. And I had to, I don't know, it's time, you need to go home. So many years ago, I worked as a young architect in Toronto. And one day my boss said, there's a new fellow who's going to come and work with you. His father-in-law is David Lewis. He's at the time the leader of the NDP party in Canada. He's never worked in an architect's office. Michael, I want you to look after him. And I did. We worked together for a year, and then one day Irving Grossman called me into his office and said, Michael, we've just lost a big job in the Ontario government. I can't afford to keep both of you in the back room. I'm going to let you go because you'll find another job. I'm not so sure Daniel will. Well, of course, Daniel was Daniel Libeskind. He went on to become the most famous architect in the world, and I am still schlepping around. But I did get a job. It's a fascinating building. It makes you feel very uncomfortable. If I was being cheeky, I would say it's for the birds. But it's an important building, and I think it is indeed. A lot of people that go there and learn about the Jewish people. And of course, in Berlin, there's also the Holocaust Memorial, which again is an incredible development. Again, it's not for everybody. But I want to finish off in Munich, because there's a complex in the center of Munich. There's a synagogue, a community center, and a Jewish museum. And this Jewish museum was absolutely incredible as far as I was concerned. On the front door, it says, something like that was done in the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And already you begin to wonder what's going on. But what I'd like to finish off with is this. Gorfinkel, or Gorf as he's known, an American cartoonist, was invited by the city of Berlin, which owns the Jewish and runs the Jewish Museum, to depict the history of the Jewish people in cartoons. And I don't think you can read this, so I'm going to read it for you. Basically, it says, Zeta, you've got an invitation, an official invitation from Munich to return. We would be honored to host you, a former resident, to return to Munich, to tour the city, and share your remembrances with our new Jewish museum. What an opportunity, Zeta. Are you going to go? No. Why not? I'm trying not to remember what everyone else must not forget. As he gets into the cab, his grandmother hands him some money. Bernie, you're going to have to do all the shopping in Germany. Why is that? Zeta won't buy anything German. My name is Joseph Rabinovich. I'm going to be your guide here in Moon. Rabinovich, you're Jewish? And you're German? Yes. You're Jewish and you chose to live in Germany? I need a beer. Real Jews drink vodka. And at the end, so these are the cartoons spread out around this Jewish museum. And the final one, cartoonist in a German Jewish museum? Well, Jews have always used humor to cope with tough subjects. Why not Munich? What's important is that future generations learn from the past and build a brighter tomorrow. Amen. Well, Zeta, our trip to Munich is almost over. Is there anything you missed that you'd like to see? My family. Tomorrow you're going to go see our cemetery, the wonderful job that Shirley and many others in the community have done. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope it inspired you to think a little bit about how you remember. Bravo.